Hello friends, we have already discussed the two defects of eye, which were myopia, that is nearsightedness, and hypermetropia, that is farsightedness. We discussed what is the problem, what is the defect in such eyes, and how to correct them. So now there is one more defect which is known as astigmatism. What happens in this case is that light coming from any object, after passing through lens, it focuses on multiple points simultaneously. So it might fall on retina, but it might also fall on some other portion on the eyeball, in front of the eyeball. You can say in front of the retina and at the back of retina as well. So these multiple focusing of rays leads to astigmatism. It's because now what will happen that the person won't be able to see clear image. He might see multiple images, which often leads to blurring of vision. So this is the thing only here, that ray is coming from a particular object, but it is getting focused at multiple points, and that's why it leads to blurred vision. And the main problem here is basically of the cornea. Cornea gets damaged, then what happens, because we know that most of the refraction of light rays happen in the front portion only, in the cornea and the aqueous humor itself. Almost all of the light entering in the eye, they gets refracted in this portion, cornea itself. So if cornea is damaged, then it would lead to multiple refractions of the light. So there will be so many light rays of a single object. There will be multiple refractions in different direction, and that's why the lens duty is to focus the light rays. So it will focus the light rays at, obviously they might get focused at different places, because it depends on the distance from which light rays are entering in, and also what kind of and what angle of refractions are being made by the cornea. So depending on that, and what is the focal length, is the lens relaxed or contracted, so all these things matter, and that's why we get multiple images. But we can't say images, but we say that multiple focusing of light rays. Though there is just one object and light rays are coming from just that particular object, but here they are getting converged at multiple points, and that point can be anywhere. It can be on the retina, but also in front, at the back, or on other parts of the eyeball. So this would lead to blurred vision. You can yourself feel that if the image is getting made here also, which is, suppose this point is retina, so there might be the focusing of rays at the retina itself, but if some rays are getting focused at this point also, then you can see that there are like two portions where images are getting formed. So if two images are getting formed very closely, so that would lead to blurred vision. You will see multiple images of a single object. So this is what leads to astigmatism, and the main reason for this is the damage to cornea. And how does that damage happen? It could be some physical damage which we can't avoid, but the usual thing which often leads to this is rubbing of eyes. That's the reason that we often advise not to rub eyes, because basically the outermost portion of the eye is your cornea. So if we try to touch or rub our eyes, basically we are hitting or touching the cornea, and the way you rub your eyes, that would definitely affect the cornea. And if it's severe rubbing, then it would definitely damage the cornea. And cornea is the first thing which light rays coming from outside world face. So if cornea gets damaged, then it would lead to multiple refractions, and then multiple focusing of light rays. So this one is the astigmatism, one of the eye defects. The next defect that we are going to study is presbyopia. Now, if you look at the diagram, this looks familiar, isn't it? Can you relate it to the diagram that we have studied in one of the eye defects? This diagram relates with hypermetropia. Yes, you are right. Hypermetropia, which is farsightedness. Now, what happens in hypermetropia? That people are able to see distant objects clearly, but they have difficulty in seeing nearby objects distinctly. The same condition, more or less similar condition, is faced by people in old age. So, in old age, people can see far off objects properly, almost properly, but they face extreme difficulty in watching nearby objects distinctly. Because you must have observed that in case of children, in younger generation, we often find the cases of myopia. Small children, students, even youngsters, they suffer from myopia. That is, they have problem in seeing distant objects clearly. That's why students face difficulty in seeing the blackboard if they sit at the back benches. So that is the problem often faced by younger people. So myopia is basically a defect of younger people. I'm not saying it's always the case, but most of the times. And this case where person faces difficulty in seeing nearby objects is the defect which arises in hypermetropia, or in case we say it presbyopia. Now what is the difference? We say in both the situation the image is forming at the back of the retina. So now in hypermetropia we studied that there could be two reasons when image forms at the back of the retina. One is the focal length of the lens has increased. One case could be this, because the more the distance light rays have to travel in converging to a point is basically the focal length. So usually rays should converge at this particular point. They should travel shorter distance, but they are traveling further and getting converged at the back of the retina. So that means the focal length of the lens has increased. So this could be the one of the reasons. We have two reasons basically. So one reason could be that increased focal length of the lens, and that's why the rays are getting converged at much farther away distances. Other reason could be shortening of eyeball. What if lens is working properly, it's forming the image where it should have been, it's contracting and relaxing properly, but eyeball has shortened up. If it used to be here, now it has shortened up, and that's why we are not getting the image on the retina. So now these are the two reasons that we face in hypermetropia. But in case of presbyopia, out of these two reasons, the major reason is due to the lens and not of the eyeball. Eyeball is functioning properly, it's in its normal shape, but it's the lens which is not giving the good results. So this happens in old age because we know that we have the ciliary muscles which hold the lens properly in position, and those are the muscles which often relax and contract to make the lens thinner or thicker depending on the situation. For a normal eye, if person has to see a distant object, in that case ciliary muscles relax and the lens becomes thinner. In that case its focal length decreases and light rays coming from distant object, far away object, can be easily focused onto the retina. And in case of nearby objects, for a normal eye, ciliary muscles contract, so the lens becomes thicker. Now, so if lens becomes thicker, in that case its focal length decreases, because we know that now rays are coming from a nearby object, so they have to be focused quite earlier, and that's why the focal length of lens decreases, and then again we get the image properly onto the retina. So as people get aged, the ciliary muscles, they lose their strength and stamina, they get weak, and now they are no longer able to hold the lens properly and to mold it accordingly. So in old age, people have difficulty in focusing their lens properly because their nerves are not too strong, their muscles are not too strong. So if they are holding a nearby object, then it's very difficult to contract the lens. So this function gets weak as people aged up. That is the reason person is not able to focus the rays at much shorter distances, and that's why the image gets formed behind the retina. So presbyopia is almost like hypermetropia, but here there is one major reason, which is the malfunctioning of the lens, or malfunctioning of the ciliary muscles and not of the eyeball. So it's the old age defect, because ciliary muscles, they are not able to contract the lens properly, and that's why we cannot get the image properly onto the retina. There is also a possibility that person might face both the condition in old age, because as we know that lens is not functioning properly, muscles, ciliary muscles are not functioning properly in old age, so they might face difficulty in relaxing the muscles and making the lens thinner in seeing distant objects. So there is possibility, and it actually happens, that in old age people suffer from both myopia and hypermetropia. But usually this is the case where they have the problem in seeing nearby objects. So if a person is facing from both myopia and hypermetropia, in that case the person would be needing bifocal lens. The person needs both the lenses to correct both the defects. So usually we have the specs or spectacles where we use bifocal lens. So bi means two, focal means focusing lens. So two lenses will be used which have different focusing powers. So now usually we straight our eyes up in seeing distant objects, and when we hold a nearby object, then we lower down our eyes. So there is a partition in such lenses. You must have observed that when you see the specs of old people, then you can see a partition, this round circle and then this glass. Both are lenses, but this portion is to see distant objects. And which lens do we need to see distant objects properly? We need concave lens. So the upper portion is concave lens, from where person can see distant objects clearly, and the lower portion is convex lens, through which person can see nearby objects properly. These days it is possible to correct the refractive defects with contact lenses or through surgical interventions. So some people prefer to use spectacles and some go for contact lenses, which directly fits over this cornea. It fits over the cornea and does the same task as the specs perform. And some go for different surgeries also, where they just cure the damaged part. One more thing, that the defect that we studied known as hypermetropia, also called farsightedness, is also known by another name, which is hyperopia. So you might see this statement also, this term. So today we discussed astigmatism, where we have multiple focusing of light rays that occurs due to the damage in the cornea. And the other one was presbyopia, where people mostly suffer from hypermetropia, but this is the old age defect, and it's simply because of malfunctioning of the ciliary muscles, which are not able to contract or relax the lens properly. The major reason for this defect is malfunctioning of lens. Lens is not able to focus the light rays onto the retina. And there is also a possibility that in old age, person might suffer from both myopia and hypermetropia. So in that case, the person would need bifocal lenses where the upper portion of the spectacles form the concave lens to see distant objects clearly, and the lower portion forms the convex lens to see nearby objects clearly. In general, people often think that why is the need to give another term presbyopia? Well, that's simply to distinguish hypermetropia from the case of old age. This might occur in normal age people also, but if the similar defects occur when people get aged up in old age, then we name it as presbyopia. This is all for the day. Thank you.